And what do you have in the pastures now in the way of animals?
So we run a flock of sheep, are our main herbivores that help us convert this grass into energy, into usable nutrients in the soil. And then we run a flock of laying hens behind them as our parasite control, pasture sanitation program.
Mary said that you're moving every 12 hours or so, or twice a day?
Yeah, about every 12 hours. So there's everybody. Oh, not everybody. All the lambs that are there are still on milk. So the mamas really need as much forage as I can give them. And so I'm probably leaving more than I normally would. So typically I like to have them eat a third, trample a third, and leave a third standing. But right now it's probably, they might be eating, I don't know, maybe half of that. So I'm probably leaving, and they're not trampling a lot because it's not tall. But in the spring, I'd much rather move them quicker.
Right.
And give the grass all the opportunity it can to come back once it starts warming up.
So this grass, they were in this pasture prior to the one that they're in right now? Or is this two back?
This is two back. So
two back.
This is probably 24 hours.
Okay. And then this is ungrazed since last fall.
Ungrazed, yeah. Although they grazed some of this winter. So,
Yeah.
some of this was stockpiled up here, but not much.
Well, I'm gonna let you keep
But
doing
this
your
hasn't
work
been
then.
grazed. Yeah. Probably less than 10 minutes I'll have this set up.
Okay.
And then I'm going to let them in up there in that corner. So we do there's a lot of terms for it, but it's a management intensive grazing system. So we intensively manage our sheep based on the forage available out on pasture. So their paddock size and duration is based on available forage. And then with that in mind, we also, we're managing for multiple things. So we manage for, managing for parasites. So parasite cycle on the one that affects the lambs the most is a barber pole worm, and that life cycle is about 4 days. So we'll bring the sheep into a paddock, they'll graze it, and we'll make that paddock large enough that they can eat everything that I want them to eat within
a day or 2 days.
Yeah, within 2 or 3 days. That way I can move them to a fresh paddock before that life cycle of the barber pole worm starts to come up and to reinfect the flock. The other reason we do that is for manure distribution. So if you bring your flock into a controlled paddock, you get more even coverage of manure versus letting them graze wherever they want. They'll go and graze. They'll take all that graze material in their belly to a tree, and they'll lay down next to that tree in the shade, and then that's where all that nutrients will be dropped, versus a system where you're defining the paddocks for them. You're getting manure distribution where you want it to be. And then also grass and plants take about 2 to 3 days to regrow after they've been nipped, clipped, or bit. So I don't want our sheep to take 2 bites out of a plant. So I want them to come in, take a bite down to the level that they're eating to, and then I want that plant to have the ability to come back up and grow without getting bit a second time. And in order for that plant to grow up get tall enough with its leaf matter to collect solar energy, put that energy and nutrients back into its roots, and continue to flourish, it needs about 30 to 45 days of recovery time.
Mm-hmm.
So our rotation will never come back to the same paddock before that 30 to 45 day window. So manure distribution, and also with the pasture and the intensive grazing, it's encouraging our flock to eat everything on the ground. Whereas if they could just go out and continuously graze, they're going to pick the stuff that's most palatable to them. So the sweet grasses or whatever they feel like eating. In an intensive grazing system, they are encouraged and almost forced to eat everything on their plate. So just like you take a kid to a buffet, he's going to go for the ice cream and the cookies, but we're encouraging our flock to eat their veggies by defining what their plate is that they have for that day. So we'll go move the sheep later, and you'll see when they go into their paddock, they instantly put their heads down, and it becomes a competition about who gets to graze what first. So they are competitively eating as much as they can get, because they know that there's a certain amount of feed on the ground for them for that day. So the palatability goes out the window, and it's I got to get full on my belly before we move to the next paddock. So they're getting vitamins and minerals from the diversity of plants, which also increases their health and immune system. And so those are the main reasons why we are rotating the way that we do right now.
And then we rotate the chicken, the laying hens behind them, to then eat those barber pole worms. So just as in the manure, they're just starting to hatch and come forth and become edible food for the chickens, we then move the chickens a few days behind the lambs into the paddock, and then they scratch it clean. So they open up all the piles, they sort through it all. They are also competitively eating for those worms, and then we don't have to do any sort of we don't do any worm control. Like if we get worms, we get worms, and they have to either grow out of it or not make it. But the chickens help keep the pasture clean so that worm population is just hopefully dead end right there, and then after the lambs have moved off it, the chickens come, clean it up, and then it's done.
And they also help with fly control. So a lot of
Fly
cattle
larvae.
operations, they spray insecticides on their cows to keep the fly load down, or they'll have the rubs. I don't know if you've seen the big carpet-looking rubs that they'll scratch their backs on. Those are insecticides that they put on their backs to keep the flies from bothering them. So the chickens also do that. They'll go through, scratch through manure pies and eat the larvae of flies, so we don't have to have fly control. They're parasite dead end cycles, fly control, and then manure spreading too. So instead of having a concentrated load of nutrients in a softball size area, the chickens will take that and spread it out over a basketball size area. So you're spreading that manure out over a larger square inch of soil to help with fertilizing and soil nutrition, plant growth.
All the things.
Symbiotic, wonderful relationship that they have.
Yeah.
All good.
We're going to do a little paddock shift. So right now we're moving them every give or take 12 hours. This time of the day is great too, because the grass has had all day to absorb sunlight and build up its sugars before sending them down to the roots. So usually around 3-4 o'clock in the spring, the grass is going to have the most potential and nutrients for the sheep. So we try to catch one in the late afternoon after the sun has been feeding the grass all day, and then sometimes we'll do a morning move also. Hey girls!
on and get the most nutrition fastest. Is that for minerals?
Yeah, so this is at the buffet style I was telling you about. So each compartment has a different mineral need, or different mineral that they need. And depending on the paddock that they're in and what they're getting out of the soil or not getting, they'll come and they'll pick individual minerals to round out their diet. So that the thought is we're letting the sheep determine how to amend our soil. So when they're grazing and they're not getting enough selenium, they'll come over to this box, they'll consume selenium and then excrete anything that they don't need. So they are remineralizing our soil as they're consuming what they're not getting on pasture. So instead of doing soil tests, soil analysis, and spreading whatever those amendments may need, we're relying on the lambs and the sheep to tell us what the soil is lacking. And depending on where they're at on the farm, their needs go up and down. And typical sheep minerals, everything would just be mixed together in one bag. You'd feed that bag, and if the ewe just needs some salt, she has to consume 20 other minerals with that salt just to get the salt that she needs. And then she's dumping 20 minerals that your soil may not necessarily need out on your soil, which is now over mineralizing and making the soil out of balance, and then also costing money for minerals that you wouldn't otherwise need to be dumping out. And I think it's a big problem that we have in our farming practices is not paying attention what the soil needs and just making large gross assumptions based on what's been recommended versus listening to the animals and letting them make those decisions for us. There's no better sheep than a sheep, so I don't know why I think that I could be better sheep than a sheep is. And that's it.
Where have you been with these paddocks?
So this is 12 hours ago approximately, and then what we've been doing is basically a checkerboard. So red black. I've been switching them back and forth, right and left. So this was about 24 hours ago, 48, all the way back to about 7 days ago, shifting paddocks right to left down the hill.
And getting back to the house gets you back about 8 days?
7, 8 days.
7,
yeah.
8 days?
Yeah, 7, 8 days ago I was down at the house. They were in the corral. They cleaned the corral up, and I brought them out of the corral and then into their first net. And then they were in the net for 12 hours, and then they got shifted, and then the chickens came out about 2 days after the sheep. So the chickens have been rotating for about 5 days, I guess. 6 days, 5 or 6 days.
And they're right now about a day behind? Two days behind?
Yeah, 12, 24, 36. They're about 2 days behind, 48 hours behind.
Right now you're having to do one paddock for every 12 hours, which is, it's great. It's getting everything cleaned up and straightened up, and
Except
you
for
can
12 hours
see,
from now is 2 in the morning.
Well, we're a little behind on today's paddock.
I was
But
gonna
that's
say I
okay.
wouldn't want to get up for that
No.
first one.
And if you want to, if you're able to kind of pan here and then like where David is and then look upwards, so the sheep, their very first paddock was right here. So this is where we started. So the grass is already coming back, super lush, looking good. And then they hopped this way, up, over. You can kind of see. And so this was probably maybe a week and a half ago, and it's already recovered from this really brown sort of looking.
Like up there, yeah.
Yep.
So we ought to be able to see that from the air. That
Yeah.
the,
So
the
you'll
root
when
goes
you
around the top.
so when you're checking that out with the drone, check out this is where they started, and then you'll kind of see, and then you'll also be able to see where the chickens have chased them.
Okay.
The paddocks that are really, really sandy and brown will be the ones that the chickens have been in and have scratched actually down to the ground. But since I've incorporated it, we've seen the earthworm population out in the garden it's just growing, which is great.
It's something I've
So-
seen in the pastures too.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Last year I couldn't find an earthworm.
Mhm.
And I think it was because the grass was always so low that the heat from the sun was just keeping it too warm for those first few inches. So they were down there and living somewhere. But now that with the practices we're doing with the rotation of the lambs and letting grass recover, it's keeping the soil cooler, and I think it's becoming a better environment for the earthworm. So now, I mean, I can go out to almost anywhere on the pasture, scratch back some ground cover and see the evidence of the earthworms now, which is cool.
Great.
This spring I was walking the fence line and I could hear the earthworms sucking back in to the soil. Every step I took would make a vibration and they would all suck back down into the soil. And it was really cool to hear that.
Cool.
And then I started jumping up and down to see like how loud I could make it to get more of them to suck back down in the earth.
Earthworm play.
Yeah.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
Playing with earthworms.
I couldn't see them, but I could hear them.